recording.
Hello, this is Chapter 14 of By the Book, and this is Fox, Books, Crocks, and Crooks.
And By the Book is the first section of the proposed How to Be a Hero series, and written by Lori Cole and Mishell Baker, and co-author Lori Cole is doing the live reading here. And let us go to the webcam.
Yes, and why don't we focus it on the center? Yeah, there we go. Okay. The bruises on Falcon's face were very obvious today, which is probably why Sheriff Meisterson chuckled when Falcon asked directions to the healer's house. After listening to the brief lecture on how he and Hawk should be more careful, Falcon set out along the western road. The sheriff had told him to look for a rough dirt path branching off to the south past the footbridge. Falcon was just approaching the bridge when he noticed a bay centaur heading towards town. The centaur's red-brown hide gleamed in the sun, and he wore a bow and a quiver of yellow-fletched arrows across his back. Falcon also noticed that he was noticeably favoring his right foreleg. When Falcon waved, the centaur turned toward him, noticing him for the first time. "Hey!" the centaur shouted in an angry tone. "You there!" "Yes, sir?" Falcon was puzzled by the apparent hostility. "Are you any relation to that young scamp calling himself Fox?" Falcon felt a qualm of dread. What has she gotten into now? I'm Falcon, his brother. Has he done something wrong?" "I suspect that he stole 2 of my chickens," said the centaur sternly, "although I have no proof of it." "Fox wouldn't steal any chickens," Falcon said with confidence. "While Wren might borrow them for a prank, he felt certain she would bring them back." The centaur gave a curt, dismissive wave of his hand. "At any rate, that does not concern me nearly as much as the behavior of you and your brothers towards my daughter." Are you Hilda's father?" "Yes, I am Heinrich Ferdinand, and whether Hilda is encouraging you or not, I demand that you stop hovering around her stand all day. She has business to conduct, and courting is not part of that business." Falcon almost laughed in surprise, but thought better of it. Courting anyone here in Siegburg would have been the farthest thing from his mind. "I assure you I'm not courting her," he said respectfully. "I've purchased apples from her, and once I asked her a few questions at the town when my brother went missing, but those are the only times I've spoken to her." Heinrich frowned, studying Falcon. "Your brother Fox gave me a different impression. However, you have an honest way about you, so I will take your word over his." "Thank you, sir." "Be that as it may," said Heinrich, without softening even a fraction, "it is a simple fact that Fox has been courting my daughter, and 2 of my hens disappeared as we were arguing about this." "You talked to Fox outside of town?" Falcon asked with a sinking feeling in his stomach. Heinrich nodded. "He came to my farm to ask permission to take my daughter out courting. I refused, and he was unspeakably rude." Wren was going to be in big trouble if Hawk found out that she had left town. Falcon considered his words carefully. "I'm sorry," he said slowly, "but I really don't think Fox was courting your daughter. I don't think he even knows what courting is all about. He's only 12. Heinrich gave a snort of surprise. 12? He's certainly tall for his age. Then he looked thoughtful. "But you are right. He still has the voice of a young boy." "Not exactly," Falcon thought wryly. "I don't know about the chickens," he said in all honesty, "but that just doesn't sound like him." "I think you are blinded by your affection for your brother," Heinrich said severely. "You may not be fully aware of his wicked streak. I suggest you question him about my birds, and watch his eyes closely when he answers. It is not too late to turn such a young one from an errant ways." I'll be certain to talk to him about it, Falcon said sincerely. I have lost over half my flock to a damnable red fox who always seems to escape my bow, and I do not need another fox plaguing my farm. Thanks to the brigands, I am slower on the chase than I once was. Falcon looked at Heinrich's foreleg. The knee was obviously swollen. Would you like me to bring you some healing salve? Falcon offered. I was just on my way to the healer's cottage. Heinrich looked at him in surprise. That is most kind of you, he said. I shall give you money for the salve and perhaps an extra coin for your trouble. Don't worry about the extra coin, replied Falcon. I have to go there anyway. Heinrich approached and handed forward Mond to Falcon. His hand was large and rough, and a light dusting of black hair at the knuckles. When you pick up the salve for me, give the healer again my thanks. Without her skillful setting my leg, I might never again been able to bear weight on it. I'll let her know that you are getting better, Falcon said as they parted ways. As he started off back down the road towards the healers, Falcon found himself worrying about Wren. If she caused too much trouble, Hawk would probably send her home. It was obvious who would have to go with her, and Falcon wasn't ready to leave Hawk to the dangers of Siegburg with only a 14-year-old novice spellcaster to protect him. At the Adventurers Guild, Wolfgang was snoring by the fire as usual, and Hawk didn't bother to wake him. Instead, he went straight for the bookshelf. The Siegburg Adventurers Guild Hall didn't have quite the impressive library that was pictured in the illustration opposite page 9 of the How to Be a Hero. There were only about 24 volumes all told, and most of it looked to be pretty boring stuff. Hawk picked up a book on local wildlife and thumbed through it, looking for anything on bears. The text was horribly dull, but Hawk was able to find a chapter on bears and skim through it before starting to nod off. He got a pretty good idea of how many cubs a local bear might have at a time and what mating season was, but very little idea of how he might kill one. He sighed, disappointed, and put it back. Moving on, his eyes skimmed over a red leather cover of a particularly tattered, fragile old book, Collected Wisdom of Dietrich Duckelheiter. Wait a minute. Dietrich Duckelheimer? That name sounded awfully familiar. The book looked ready to fall apart, so he pulled it from the shelf very gently. Opening it to a page somewhere in the middle, he instantly felt butterflies in his stomach. Pictures. Detailed drawings of men with swords skewering each other in 100 different ways. Some of the captions distinctly rang a bell in Hawk's mind. Wrath strike, crooked strike. A yelp of joy escaped him, and he glanced quickly at Wolfgang, but the old dwarf snored on. Very, very carefully, Hawk carried the book to a comfortable corner. A warm feeling of satisfaction came over him as he touched the pages. Suddenly, he reminded himself of Owl, and he couldn't stop smiling a bit. The book was truly amazing. Clearly illustrated in bold black ink were the 5 master strikes he'd been shown that day. Next in the book were something called the 4 guards, and then the 4 displacement, and more, complete with rhymes for easy memorization. A wide grin spread across Hawk's face. He still didn't know how to kill a bear, but he did know one thing. A certain Schirmeister was going to be very surprised the next time Hawk went to the castle. The healer's cottage was only a short distance from the main road, but it was hidden behind a grove of spruce trees, and the dirt trail was nearly overgrown with brush. Falcon would have thought that the path to the healers would be well worn, given all the problems in the valley. Falcon approached a clearing encircled by a low rock wall with a wooden gate. Painted on the whitewashed gate was a green jar, the symbol of a healer. Beyond the gate, he could see a thatched roof cottage besides a herb garden. Falcon thought of Auntie Willie's garden in Alpendorf and wondered if he would ever see it again. Somewhere nearby, a crow cawed noisily, startling him from his thoughts. With a sigh of homesickness, Falcon opened the gate and walked up the stone path to the cottage. The door of the cottage was wide open, and Falcon could see movement inside the doorway. He stepped upon the porch and looked inside. In the center of the room was a large table covered with jars, bottles, and bundles of dried herbs. In the fireplace on the far wall, a small cauldron bubbled and steamed, filling the air with the odor of rosemary and pine. A short, well-rounded woman bustled about the room, her walnut-colored hair pulled back in a bun at the back of her neck. When she turned towards Falcon, he could see she had the sort of face that was made for smiling. "Hello there," she said, squinting against the sunlight from the open door. "Don't recall as I've seen you before. Come on in." "I'm Falcon," he said, returning her smile as he stepped into the cottage. The healer stopped as he entered, her mouth falling slightly ajar. Her gaze swept him from head to toe, then nodded with a slow smile. "You'll be wanting a healing salve," she noted, turning back to her work. "Actually, I need a few, if that's all right," said Falcon. "My family and I are staying in town a while. I'd like 2 for us, and also I need to pick up 1 for the Centaur farmer." The healer frowned. "Ah, yes, Heinrich. Poor fellow. He had such a run of bad luck." Then she smiled again, and her eyes sparkled merrily. "Have a seat over there, dear, while I make you up some fresh salve." Falcon seated himself upon the gnarled wooden chair, and a large gray tabby appeared from out of nowhere to rub against his legs. The healer pulled down a bowl and 2 empty jars from a high shelf, and then came across back to the table. "My name is Amelia Alphenbier," she said. "You can call me Amelia if you like. Most people around here call me the healer, but sometimes it's nice to hear your own name. So what brings your family from Alpendorf?" "My brother Hawk is learning swordsmanship," Falcon said, "so that he can become a hero. My other brother Owl is learning magic." He bent to pet the cat, disturbing a cloud of grayish fur that somehow all ended up in his mouth. He subtly tried to spit it back out. "What a talented family you have," the healer remarked as she took down a couple of pots from a different shelf. "What is it that you do?" Falcon shrugged, stroking the cat gently with one hand while he picked fur off of his tongue with the other. "I try to keep my family out of trouble." He paused long enough to say, "But mostly I just muck the Baron's stables." Amelia smiled knowingly and put a selection of herbs into a wooden mortar, grinding them carefully into a powder. "Falcon is quite an unusual name," she observed, "but yet suits you. You have a noble look about you." "Thanks, Miss Amelia," replied Falcon, a little embarrassed at calling an older woman by her first name. "I have another question, if it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all." Amelia put the powdered herbs into the bowl with some of the ingredients from the other pots and started to beat the mixture. "Would you happen to know what a hungry bear might like to eat?" Amelia looked up, startled. "Other than you, I suppose you mean?" Falcon smiled. "Yes. There's a bear tied out in the woods, and I want to help it." The healer looked at him for a long time, a strange expression on her face. Then she looked back down at her work. "Any kind of meat or fruit would do nicely," she said. "Brown bears are omnivorous." Falcon considered that for a moment, then decided he would buy some dried apples from the Centaur filly. Watching Amelia, he noticed a row of sealed jars on the shelf behind her that looked just like the empty ones on the table. "Are those healing salves on the shelf over there?" he asked uncertainly. "Maybe you didn't need to start from scratch." Amelia flushed, then glanced over her shoulder at the shelves. Oh, silly me! I suppose they are. Well, now that I've started, I might as well finish. Fresh is so much better anyway, don't you think? She turned her attention back to her mixing. So, do your brothers look like you? Hawk does. We're twins. Well, he'll certainly fit the hero part to a T then. Broad shoulders, strong jaw, fair hair, just like a hero from a storybook. Unfortunately, said Falcon with a sigh, this isn't exactly a storybook place. Hawk almost got himself killed the day before last. I think the only reason he survived is that he made it to Arana's Peace. Arana's Peace? Said Amelia with obvious delight. How marvelous! If he ever goes back, tell him to fetch me some flowers for him. I always use them in my healing potions, and it's such a long journey. Falcon felt a streamy sense of pleasure at the very thought of that place. If I'm ever there again, he said, I'll pick you up some for you myself. The gray tabby, obviously miffed that Falcon wasn't giving her any more his undivided attention, jumped briskly onto his lap. He obliged her by scratching under her chin. I wish I could have known Arana, said Amelia a bit wistfully. She was half she, they say, and as beautiful as her garden. Falcon smiled. The first time I saw her garden was like a miracle. I was led there by the most amazing creature, a pure white stag. Amelia dropped her spoon into her cauldron and gaped. A white stag? With silver antlers? Yes, stammered Falcon, startled by her expression. You saw the guardian of the forest? I don't know what it was, he said hesitantly. I wasn't sure it was even real. Oh, said Amelia reverently, picking up her spoon again. The forest guardian is very real. Strange, for him to stray so far from the Eichenfrau. What's the Eichenfrau? Said Falcon, trying not to let the cat prick his legs as she lay down on his lap. You haven't heard about the Eichenfrau? Said the healer in amazement. She and Arana's Peace were two of the main draws to this valley. The Eichenfrau is a tree spirit, very ancient, who keeps the forest healthy. Her glade is somewhere to the northwest of town, but I've heard she can't be seen unless she wants to be. I'd love to see her, began Falcon eagerly. Then he gave a rueful little smile. I don't suppose she'd want to see me, though. You saw the guardian, didn't you? No one is quite sure what he is, spirit or animal, vision or flesh. Only the purest in heart could see him. She looked up, and her dark blue eyes held Falcon's for a moment. Embarrassed by the healer's gaze, Falcon looked out the door. He could see that the shadows on the rock wall had grown longer, and he'd agreed to meet Hawk near the main gate of town in mid-afternoon. Is the salve nearly ready? He asked as he turned back to look at her. It's starting to get late. Oh, I'm sorry to keep you, said Amelia, her cheeks turning rosy. I just so seldom get to chat with new people. I'm almost finished. She turned back to the bowl and added a dollop of some unpleasant-smelling concoction from one of her pots. She then whipped the entire mixture with her wooden spoon. As he watched her working so diligently, he felt guilty that he had embarrassed her. I don't mean to seem impatient, he said. The only reason I'm trying to hurry is that Hawk is waiting in town for me. Oh, and here I'm chatting away like we had all the time in the world. Amelia started to pour the thick salve into one of the jars. Say, tell your brother the hero if that he finds a ring in his travels that looks like an herb wreath, I'll give him 6 solen. I don't know how I could have lost it. 6 solen? Said Falcon in astonishment, then gave a little laugh. I thought it was something just to see a mon for the first time when I got here. I'll let Hawk know about the ring. For that kind of money, I'm sure he'll look for it. Amelia filled 4 jars and sealed their lids with beeswax. That'll be 12 mon for the 3 salves, she said as she brought the jars over to Falcon. Falcon picked the cat off his lap and put her down on the floor, smiling apologetically as she mewed in protest. Reaching into his money pouch, Falcon counted out the coins. He handed Amelia the money, which he placed in a large crock on the table. Then, to Falcon's surprise, she handed him all 4 of the jars. Just a little extra, for the pure in heart, she explained as she stared up at him with her large eyes. They made Falcon think of blueberries. "I hope you'll come again and see me." "Thanks, Miss Amelia," Falcon said as he placed the jars in his satchel. "I really appreciate that you made up this fresh batch just for us." "Oh, it was no trouble," she replied as her cheeks grew apple red. "And it's just Amelia." "She's such a kind person," Falcon mused as he opened and shut the gate to her yard. "I wonder why she's out here alone, so far from town." For Wren, the day went by excruciatingly slowly. She was happy to help out the Catas, but the smell of charred wood stung her eyes. All she could think about all day as she scrubbed soot off the dishes was that the Thieves Guild, and how surprised Bruno would be to find out that she had learned the password. After dinner, when the boys went to bed at last, Wren waited for Hawk to start snoring. Then she counted out 200 heartbeats before climbing down from her bedroom window. She almost danced across the darkened streets on the way to the tavern. Tonight, she would become a real thief. When she reached the door to the Aces and Eights, however, she hesitated. It wouldn't do to just charge in there, since Berthold probably would throw her out with her without even waiting to see if she knew the password. She'd just have to try to get in past him unseen. She leaned against the door and pushed it open just enough to see through into the bar. There was Berthold, standing by a keg, staring irritably into space. He was facing the door. Not good. There was a man seated at the bar, but he seemed uninterested in talking to Berthold, so Wren couldn't count on him to cause a distraction. Wren pushed the door open a little more so that she could see more of the room. The 2 drunk guys were not there tonight, but another couple of men sat arguing at the table near the bar. Crusher was in his place by the door, picking his teeth with a butcher's knife. All she'd have to do was to say the password to him, and she could get into the guild. She took a deep breath. "Somebody do something," she prayed silently, "so Berthold will look away from the door." The minutes crawled by. Finally, the man at the bar ordered a new drink, and Berthold turned to the keg behind him. Delighted, Wren slipped into the tavern and quickly crouched behind the nearest table. The sound of the door closing attracted Berthold's attention, so Wren took the opportunity to crawl alongside of the room, taking cover behind furniture. Finally, she found her way over to the Thieves Guild door. Wren gazed up at Crusher, who looked positively enormous from her vantage point. After a moment's hesitation, she tugged at his grubby trouser leg to get his attention. He gave a little start and stared down at her, clearly surprised to see her crouching at his feet. As soon as he recognized her, he snarled and leaned over to grab her. "Swordfish!" she said quickly. Crusher stopped, glowered at her, then slowly scratched his head. After a moment, aggravation seemed to give way to duty, and he moved away from the door. "Thanks," said Wren, receiving only a cold glare in response as she rose to her feet. No sooner had she reached the door's handle than she heard Berthold's grating shriek, "You again! Crusher, grab her!" The goon hesitated. "I have business here," said Wren hurriedly. "Why do you think Crusher let me in?" Crusher just grunted, starting to drool a little. "Business?" said Berthold in disbelief, suddenly scratching his nose with his thumb in an approximation of the thief sign. "Business," Wren said with a grin, returning the sign with gusto. She took extra pleasure in wiggling her fingers at him and crossed her eyes for good measure. If Berthold noticed the extra flourish, he didn't say so. He just stared at her like a landed fish, his mouth opening and shutting in disbelief. Quickly, Wren opened up the back door, and just as quickly shut it behind her. She waited for a moment with her eyes squeezed shut, listening to see if Berthold was coming after her, but nothing happened. As far as Berthold knew, Wren realized with a grin, she belonged here. Standing at the top of the narrow, dark, curving staircase, Wren felt a surge of triumph as she saw the light shining up dimly from the room below. The Thieves Guild. At last. And that was chapter 14.